Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is another very special video. Yes, we are going to analyze FPL Mate's team. We're going to look at his moves in detail and see what we can learn from how he has performed this season. So as at the end of Game Week 21, he's ranked 28th in the world. So that's really amazing stuff, and we'll also see later on that he has all his chips still available to him. So every chance that he may actually take the number one spot soon. But yes, we're going to look at FPL Mate's first 21 game weeks. And I think this video will be very useful as a summary of his journey so far. All the moves that he's made, the differential picks that he's gone for. So I've learned a lot from making this video, and I hope you guys take something away as well. Hopefully it helps us with our decision making for the rest of the season. So on the screen right now, I've put a tweet out by FPL Mate, and for the benefit of those of you guys not on Twitter, I'll just quickly share a bit of backstory of the inspiration behind this video. So I recently uploaded a video analyzing the world number 1 manager at the end of game week 19, which is the midway point of the season. And it was none other than FPL Focal. I've put the link to this video in the description so that you guys can check it out if you haven't. But basically the response was pretty positive. FPL Focal also gave it a watch and enjoyed it. So I was thinking to myself, why not do one for FPL Mate? He's also having an incredible season so far, and I thought it just made sense. So I posted a tweet asking if anyone would be interested in a video done on FPL Mate's season. And FPL Mate himself replied saying that he'd give it a watch. So here we are. And yes, that's the story. I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you're new around here, do consider subscribing. That would be awesome. It'll really help the channel. And enough of all that, and let's get on with this video. So how this video is going to work is that we are going to look at some overall statistics of FPL Mate's team over the course of 21 game weeks. And then we'll do a quick 30-second review of each game week. And then we'll wrap this up with some learning points. So without further ado, let's get cracking. So these are the overall statistics of Dan's team, and honestly it is really impressive. So he had a flying start and kicked off the season at about 14k in the world, and then he managed to break into the top 6k for about 3 weeks before he recorded his lowest ever rank, which was in game week 5, where his rank took a hit and went from about 5k in game week 4 all the way back up to about 14k in game week 5. And we'll look into the details of this later on, but since then it's just been dreamland. He broke into the top 400 managers in the world in game week 9, and he has stayed there ever since, barring a slight hiccup in game week 15. He achieved his highest position at the end of game week 21, and he's now standing at 28th place in the world, so he must be buzzing right now. So looking at his total score, he recorded 1,474 points as of game week 21, which is just 51 points away from the top spot. And this works out to be an incredible average of about 70 points per game week. FPL Mate took a total of 4 4-point hits throughout the course of the 21 game weeks, and we'll have a look at who he took these hits for later on. Now, chips-wise, it's quite incredible for FPL Mate to be so high up the ranks and yet still have all his chips available to him. So this is a big advantage for FPL Mate, and definitely going to prove very useful for him come the later part of the season. Alright, so now let's drill into each game week and have a look in greater detail to see how FPL Mate got to 28th in the world. So this was how he started the season in game week 1, and he recorded a score of 115 points, which was massive, and this allowed him to kick off the season at an overall rank of 14k. He had 4 of the top performers for game week 1, which was ridiculous, and everyone on his team returned except for Shaw and Sanchez. Some notable players he started the season with was Tsimikas, who was nailed for the start of the season because Robbo was out. And he also had the West Ham duo of Antonio and Benrahma, who started off the season really well. In game week 2, no transfers were needed, so Dan wrote the transfer, and this week once again returns from everyone except 2 players who blanked, which were Wilson and Fernandes. So double-digit hauls from Tsimikas, Trent, Greenwood, and the pair of West Ham players helped him to amass 87 points, which shot him up to 4.2k in the world. Now, Dan made his first transfer in game week 3, swapping Tsimikas out for Duffy, and this week it was the captain that came up with the goods. So Antonio bagging a goal, an assist, and 2 bonus points. Returns from Shaw, who kept a clean sheet in a 1-0 win against Wolves, and Greenwood, who scored that winning goal, were all instrumental in bringing Dan to an overall rank of 2.9k at the end of game week 3. Now, you could say that game week 4 was the week that Dan did a bit of surgery to his team. So he made a total of 3 transfers, and thankfully he had 2 free transfers, so he only took a 4-point hit. And the changes he made were to swap Wilson, Fernandes and Ings out for Jimenez, Jota and Ronaldo. Yes, game week 4 was the week that Ronaldo came back to the Premier League, and like many, Dan couldn't resist captaining him, and he came up with the goods against Newcastle, as we all will remember. But even with some decent returns from other players like Trent and Salah, his 73 points were not enough for a green arrow, and then dropped from 2.9k to 5.7k. Next, in game week 5, Benrahma was taken out and the Prince Rafinha came into FPL Mates team. And unfortunately, quite a number of players blanked this week, with only 4 players returning for Dan, and one of them was Salah, who we all know isn't much of a differential. And this was mainly why his rank dropped from 5.7k all the way down to 14k, as we saw just now in the overall chart. Now in game week 6, we see that FPL Mate rolled the transfer, so he didn't make any rash changes even though his rank had taken quite a hit the last game week. And he set up with a 3-4-3 formation with these players. So returns from Jota, Salah, Rafinha, Jimenez and his captain Antonio was enough to reward him for his composure and get him 55 points and a nice green arrow up to 9k. Now in game week 7, Dan took Eiling and Jota out for Azpilicueta and Sarr, and of course Azpilicueta returning 10 points immediately was a slice of luck, but we all have our lucky weeks and this was Dan's. So in what was a pretty much low scoring game week, returns from Sanchez and Duffy courtesy of Brighton's goalless draw against Arsenal, as well as a double-digit haul from Jimenez were enough to bring Dan up from 9k all the way up to 2.6k in the world. In game week 8, Dan used the one and only chip that he has used this whole season, which was his first wildcard chip. So he kept some key players like Trent and Salah of course, and using his wildcard he brought in players that will perform really well in future game weeks, as we will see. So players like Ramsdale, James, Cancelo, Foden, and he also went for the budget defender of that time, which was Livramento. A surprise pick was Mahrez, and we'll see later on what he does with Mahrez, but his wildcard team this week was enough to get 64 points and a green arrow up to 1.7k. In game week 9, Dan took his second hit of the season, so he swapped out an injured Lukaku for Kane, and he took Mahrez out for Havertz, who was more or less guaranteed a spot up front with Lukaku out injured and Werner also being unavailable at that time. This was the week that we will remember Salah scoring a hat-trick against Manchester United, and everyone who captained Havertz instead of Salah got punished. Fortunately, then captained Salah, and this was also the week that Foden and Reece James started popping up with crazy hauls. So a crazy score of 115 points took Dan all the way up to 398 in the world, and this was the breakthrough week for Dan. In game week 10, he rolled the transfer, and this week the absolute killer was Reece James, who bagged 2 goals against Newcastle. We will remember that James was brought in during the Game Week 8 wildcard, and 2 weeks on he's the top performer for Game Week 10. So this was pretty crazy, and at this point, I'm sure Dan was buzzing because he'd broken into the top 100 managers in the world, and he ended Game Week 10 at an incredible 84th place. Next up is Game Week 11, and this week Dan decided to upgrade his bench options by swapping Armstrong out for Broja. Unfortunately, Armstrong was one of the top performers for Game Week 11, getting 9 points, but even so, Dan managed to maintain his rank, and returns from Trent, Cancelo, as well as a James to Havertz dream goal were enough to get him through Game Week 11. Game Week 12's change was another bench upgrade, and this is probably the advantage of reaching the template team before others, which is that you get to have spare transfers to upgrade your bench. So this week he swapped Duffy out for Lamptey, and returns from the 3 big defenders at the back, as well as Captain Salah, got then 67 points, but that wasn't enough to keep him in the top 100, and he fell to 213th in the world. In Game Week 13, it was a double change, largely due to Ben Chilwell and Roberto Firmino's injuries. Dan brought in Jota and Alonso, who were the direct replacements for the injured players, and immediately Jota returned 14 points against Southampton. So handy returns from Ramsdale, Lamptey and Trent helped Dan to maintain his rank, and he ended Game Week 13 at 227th in the world. I remember Game Week 14 as the week that Dan revealed on his deadline stream that he was going to bring in James Maddison for Phil Foden, and I don't really know how people felt about that, perhaps some a bit unsure, but Dan went bold with his differential once again, and this time he was rewarded. Maddison came up with the goods immediately as Leicester put 2 past Southampton in a 2-2 draw. That being said, the competition in the higher ranks is pretty stiff, and Dan's 64 points brought him down to 315th in the world. No transfer was made in game week 15, and a rather poor performance from most of the players in Dan's team caused him to fall to 895th in the world. Low scores from most players and only returns for Trent, Salah and Antonio, so this was pretty much a week for Dan to forget. And I'm sure the returns on the bench with Mbeumo getting 5 points and Broja getting 8 points didn't really make him feel much better. In game week 16, Dan decided to bring Bowen and Ronaldo in for Mbeumo and Kane. Kane was a real disappointment during this period and his time had come. So this game week was a good recovery week for Dan and he got returns from pretty much everyone except James, Antonio and Broja who blanked. Ronaldo and Salah both scored a penalty each this week, and the real differential was Maddison, who did really well against Newcastle and was one of the top performers for game week 16. 79 points was enough to bring Dan back to an overall rank of 370 in the world. Dan took his third hit of the season in game week 17, and it was one that was mainly driven by postponements. So game week 17 was the week that COVID really started to disrupt the Premier League fixtures, and Dan responded by taking Ronaldo and Brownhill out for Dennis and Sterling. So Sterling was a risky pick, and he turned out to be benched the whole game as City swept Leeds away by 7-0. So tough one to take, but nonetheless, he was still able to maintain his rank, mainly because of Broja, who was initially on Dan's bench but ended up in his team as Sterling didn't start. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. In game week 18, Lamptey and Maddison were taken out for Tomiyasu and Smith Rowe, mainly to target the remaining fixtures that were left after many games were postponed due to COVID. And to get 73 points this game week was really helpful given that other FPL managers were struggling to even get 8 to 9 starting players in their team. So 5 at the back worked out really well for Dan, and nice returns from all of his midfielders was enough to take Dan up to 202 in the world. A very bold move was made in game week 19, and it was to take Son out for Salah. So there were a few trains of thought going on at this point in time, and some suggested keeping Salah till after the Chelsea game, while others suggested taking him out early for Son. Now Dan went with the latter, and he captained Son for this game week and was rewarded when Son put one past Crystal Palace just before he was subbed off. Now the main man this week, however, was Sterling, who did really well in a crazy game that saw City win Leicester 6-3. So Sterling bagged a nice double-digit haul and shot Dan up all the way to 137th place. Game week 20 was the week that Leicester shocked the Premier League by defeating Liverpool by 1 goal. And after taking Ramsdale, who had a blank game week, out for Lloris, this was Dan's team. So Antonio, Dennis, Cancelo and Son got some decent points, but the star man was Bowen, who got a hat-trick of assists and 3 bonus points to go with it. 54 points was enough to give Dan a nice green arrow, and he finished game week 20 at an incredible 65th in the world, which was at that point in time his highest rank ever. In game week 21, which initially seemed like it was a pretty decent double game week, a few managers decided to activate their free hit chip, and Dan chose not to, and after taking an injured Reece James out for Dawson, who had a nice double game week run out, this was how he lined up. So game week 21 ended up being an incredible week for those who captained Bowen instead of Antonio, and of course Dan was one of these managers. So he got a massive 42 points from Bowen, and some nice returns from Lloris, Antonio and Broja gave Dan a ridiculous score of 94 points and shot him up to his personal best rank of 28th in the world. So to wrap up our game week reviews, here is the complete list of players that Dan has owned since the start of the season, and the numbers beside the players represent how many game weeks Dan has kept them for. So it's interesting to see that Antonio is alongside Trent in being the only players that have stood the test of time and remained in Dan's team for the whole 21 game weeks. So looking at some other notable names, he's had Jota for about 12 game weeks, Broja for 11 game weeks, and at the other end, it's quite surprising to see that Rafinha has only lasted 3 weeks in Dan's team. Alright, so we've almost come to the end of the video, and I've just put out 3 points that I think I've learned from analysing Dan's team and the way he's managed his team. So the first is to be bold with your differentials and don't be afraid to go different. So a couple of times this season, Dan was able to go different and go bold with his picks, such as Maddison and Raheem Sterling, and these moves rewarded him with some really good points. Now of course, sometimes these things don't work out the way we want, and our differentials may very well end up not paying off. But at least we know that to get really high up the ranks, we have to try and take some calculated risks and be ready for whatever comes. So the second point is to upgrade your bench if possible, if you have some spare transfers, of course. Now, most of the time, we are going to want to save our transfers to bring in players that are in form or players that we want to put straight into our starting 11 for the next game week. But sometimes it pays to use those transfers to upgrade our bench, of course, only if we have the luxury of extra transfers. So throughout the season, players that were cheap options on our bench may fall out of the starting 11, or maybe there will be other bench options that pop up along the way. So for Dan's case, he upgraded his bench and brought in Lamptey and Broya, who turned out to be really helpful later on in the season when his starting 11 players either had poor fixtures or postponed matches. So if you have some spare transfers, it pays to gradually upgrade your bench, and it is an important point of consideration that we can adopt as well. So lastly, it is okay to make mistakes. So no one is perfect, and throughout the course of the season, there were some hiccups here and there. Some players that Dan brought in that may not have rewarded him as much as he wanted. Some weeks where there were quite a number of points left on his bench, and those players being in the starting 11 could have contributed to his score. But that's just the way FPL is, and we can't always get every decision right. So looking at his journey for 21 game weeks, I've also come to the understanding that it's alright to have some calls not go our way, but really to keep at our strategy and our philosophy, and eventually we will be rewarded. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and took something away, and if you did, do give this video a like and also hit that subscribe button. It'll be really awesome if you could do that. And that's all for now, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye bye.